Okay, so I'm Middaugh. I'm from Oakland, California, Mills College with the Civic Engagement Research Group. And normally, if I had a group this size, I would love to just bring you into a circle so that we could talk, but I've been informed I'm being recorded, so I need to stay up here. Forgive the formality. So before we start, I just wanted to do a little get-to-know-you activity that involves you guys having to stand up. So stand up if you remember life before the internet. Okay. Stay standing or stand up if you have ever sat at home waiting for a phone call. And if you ever had trouble finding something in the encyclopedia, or tried to find something in the newspaper for a class project and couldn't find what you wanted. Or the almanac. So yeah, I share all of these experiences. Go ahead and sit down, but many of your students don't. And so that's really at the heart of what we're trying to explore with the Educating for Democracy in the Digital Age project. So, oh, hang on, I want to set my timer, just so I make sure I stay on track. So what I want to do is share some work I've been doing with a team in Oakland Unified School District called Educating for Democracy in the Digital Age. And the goal of the project is to work district-wide to integrate civic learning opportunities into the high school curriculum, and in particular the core humanities curriculum, English and social studies. And the other goal is to sort of update our models of what we understand as best practices in civic education as we know in the digital age. So before I go into the project, I just want to share a little bit of how we got to this project because it grows out of a research and evidence base that Joe Kahn and I began around 2003. Joe's been doing it longer than me, but I began working with him in 2003. And what we wanted to do at that time was civic education was very marginalized and there wasn't a very strong evidence base that it was working. So, and in part that was because most of the studies of civic education asked people, have you had a civics course? And the findings were mixed. And we knew from what we were seeing in the field that there was quite a bit of variability in what happens in a civics course. And so that began a research of promising practices in California that we published beginning in 2005 in the last few years, studying curriculum like that of the Constitutional Rights Foundation. And so what we found is that indeed, if you look at certain practices of civic education actually does lead to increased things like political interest, intent to vote, and we're also able to follow students and find that intent to vote actually 2 years later means they were more likely to actually vote. Oh, where'd my help? Let's see if we can get back. Ah, there we go. Okay. If in doubt, restart. Okay, so yeah, we found that having things like opportunities to debate and discuss issues that matter to students, learning about the structure and function of government, but also learning why you get involved in politics leads to greater interest in voting, political interest, things like that. We also found that experiential learning opportunities were more likely to be related to things like civic action. So the idea is if you want to prepare students to both be interested in politics and act, you need a variety of opportunities to both learn about and discuss politics, but also practice politics. So that's sort of the foundation. But another foundation of this project, which Michelle referred to this morning, is a more troubling trend, which as we were in the field, we were getting the sense that these kinds of high-quality civic learning opportunities were going to schools with high levels of resources, students with quite a bit of social capital, and not necessarily getting to the students who most need support in learning how to advocate for themselves and their communities. And so we took some national survey data collected by Judith Torney-Purda and examined amongst ninth graders. They did a national survey of ninth graders' access to civic learning opportunities. Do we see systematic inequalities in who gets these learning opportunities? So we found that high SES ninth graders were more likely to learn how laws are made, learn to participate in service learning activities, and to take part in debates or panel discussions. And these inequalities were also replicated by race. So when the SD Bechtel Jr. Foundation came to us to say, we'd like to get more civic education going in Oakland. We jumped at the chance. And so I'll say a little bit about Oakland if you don't know much about it. It's an urban school district, close to 40% dropout rate, high number of low-income students, and tremendous turnover in teachers and principals. And so if there's a school district where it's difficult to sort of get continuity of an intervention, Oakland is that kind of district. At the same time, it's one where we think this is really needed, and so that sparked our efforts to start this initiative. It's a very grassroots initiative because of the amount of turnover and teacher distrust. We couldn't just come in with a curriculum and say, adopt this. We worked with a core group of teachers to say, if you're going to adapt your practice and bring civic action, civic issues into your classroom, what might that look like? And we gave them space and coaching to do that. At the same time, we're doing advocacy at the district level, so this isn't just lone rogue teachers trying to do something different, but asking the district to adapt the graduate profile so that it's college, career, and community ready, which we've been successful in doing, and also building site-based planning teams. So as we have more teachers who are interested and integrated into this, they then are starting to build teams where they can invite their colleagues in, but also get the support of their principals. So that's the basic approach. And I'm not sure why this keeps blanking out, but we'll just keep going. Bear with me, folks. Thank you. Okay. So that's the context, but what I want to focus on today is the digital piece of this. So as I said, we really need to update our models and understand, does it look different to do civic education in the digital age? And I want to start by introducing you to Martha Payne. Martha Payne is a very cute 9-year-old Scottish girl. Well, she was 9 years old in 2012 at the time. And Martha had been exploring something very personal to her, her school lunch. So what she did is every day she took pictures of her school lunch and rated it for nutrition, tastiness, that kind of thing. And she put the pictures on the blog with her statistics. So doing these kinds of... Is there anything AV can do to help me with? Okay. There we go. Okay. And so she put this on a blog. Eventually I may have fixed it just by moving the cord. Got it, okay. So she had other kids contributing pictures of their school lunch, making comments, talking about it, and then the administration got whiff of this and shut her down. They didn't want her advertising that their school lunches were not necessarily nutritious or tasty, and the blog was called Never Seconds. And so it probably would have ended there, except for there's some local news coverage of it. And celebrity chef Jamie Oliver, who's also Scottish, got wind of this and tweeted, "Stay strong, Martha," and asked people to retweet their support for her so that she could continue her food advocacy. And so that led to a great deal of pressure and reconsidering. Her blog got revived. She was able to continue with it. And as a result of the increased following, she was able to raise more than $200,000 to contribute to food, nutritious food in Africa in a school that she was partnering with. So when thinking about Martha, what we notice is, one, she's quite young, right? And that while she was putting her own voice out there, it's also the network culture around her was doing some things to bring attention. And so this is sort of what we want to study in Educating for Democracy in the Digital Age, is how do young people take advantage of some of the affordances of digital media. So our model, just to continue on with Martha as an example, is pretty standard, I would say, to a lot of progressive civic education programs or sort of newer civic education programs. We believe that young people should be able to understand and analyze issues that matter to them. So Martha discovered and analyzed her issue of school lunch and the quality of it. She also shared her perspectives online, and so other kids were able to comment. I don't know how much debate was going on, but there was some sharing of information. But she didn't just leave it there. She put her perspectives out in the public. And so the idea of being civically active isn't just do you vote, but are you participating in getting the issues out there to decide what should we vote on, what matters. And so she sort of contributed her perspective to the public dialogue. And then finally, she was able to make a difference in sort of one location by raising money to contribute food to a community. So for Etta, this combination of issue analysis, action, and then this is where I think the school setting is critical, reflecting on your role, what actions accomplish, revising one's notions of issues is really critical. And for us, that's sort of what comes together to mean community ready. Martha's example also reflects what we know is happening in politics. So I'm going to share two sets of survey data. One is a national survey of youth aged 15 to 25 that Joe Kahn, Kathy Cohen, and a team of us have been working on called the Youth and Participatory Politics Survey. And the other is a survey I've been administering to graduating high school seniors in Oakland. And what we see is probably not surprising to many of you, but nationally 46% of young people get their news and information through participatory media, so Facebook, social media, Twitter. They get it for other sources as well, but they're starting to rely on this. 15% are commenting on news stories online, 17% are moving to the table. Yeah, let's just go ahead and move so we don't keep doing this for an hour. Talking. Okay, so 17% are, so they're commenting on blogs. They're also participating in online communities, what Mimi Ito calls interest-driven communities. So really working with other people to pursue things like interest in sports, interest in crafting, that kind of thing. So the internet has really changed and become a more social place than it was even 10 years ago. And then in Oakland, what we see is these trends are even more pronounced. These kids are near Silicon Valley. It's in an urban environment. There is just a lot of technology. So, on the other hand, we're also seeing examples of youth using these to great effect. So not just Martha. For example, Daniel Mari, in response to the Trayvon Martin shooting, used social media to organize the Million Hoodie March, which helped keep that story in the news for a while. He won a Do Something award for his work. Elizabeth Wimigwam organized a flash mob to draw attention to environmental issues and indigenous rights in Canada. That's not the problem. And some of you know about Malala Yousafzai. She wrote the book I Am Malala, and she's been partnering with T-Mobile to create mobile literacy apps for girls. So there are a lot of things young people can do. We also know, though, that it's not these are sort of exemplary examples of young people using media for great effect. And we also know that there are a lot of pitfalls that come into play. So, and these are results from Oakland, but they also are aligned with the national survey findings. So only 15% of young people felt confident they could determine whether the information they find online is credible. They're having difficulty sorting through search results. So I don't know how many of your students just pick the first thing they find. So that's an issue we're dealing with. And in the national survey, I did some, using vignettes, looking at students' experiences with contentious conversations online. So many of them can see, thanks to participatory media, what other people think about issues, and that's great. 40% of them say these are often heated or heated debates using outrage language or personal attacks and things like that. So these are just what they see, and as a result, 70% are saying they don't really want to participate in these conversations. And then the last thing is we know some of the power of the internet is being able to create your own content, get your perspectives out there. And one of the troubling things is, similarly to the inequalities we see around civic learning opportunities, we also see this replicated in how digital media is used in the classroom. And so a study done by Jen Schrady showed that high college-educated people are more likely to use digital media for creating content rather than just consuming. And I don't have the stats up here right now, but there was another study just showing in low-income schools, when technology is used, it's used more for drill, basic things rather than creating media. So that was another sort of trend we wanted to counter in this setting. Okay, so why information literacy? I know many of you are social studies teachers, I imagine, and I know the English teachers we work are like, why do we have to do the librarian's job? In Oakland, we don't have many librarians, so when we started this project, what we wanted to do was have teachers really engage in that cycle I talked about: issue analysis, debate discussion, public voice, action reflection. In Oakland, they have a requirement called the Senior Project, which is a really great opportunity to do that kind of thing. And what we heard from teachers is by the time they get to the Senior Project, students don't know how to do research. This is the first time they're doing research. They spend so much time supporting the research, and so it's too much. And so for us, the idea was, how do we integrate these kinds of skills throughout the high school curriculum so that by the time students are seniors and able to do a senior project, that they actually have some of the skills that they're drawing on that they've been developing from 9th through 12th grade. So that's why we're working across the humanities and 9th through 12th grade. So our teachers are really integrating in different pieces of this process. And then on the digital media side, as you might be able to imagine, we heard a lot of, we don't have working computers, that kind of thing. And so it was really important to us to work with teachers in the settings with the realities they have and sort of say, okay, what, if you are given support and coaching, what are the practices you can bring into your classroom? And this is all in service of understanding social and political issues and acting on them. So just a quick why information literacy is so important. National survey data shows a number of people who mistakenly believe it's illegal to fire someone for their sexual orientation, 90%. In some states it's illegal. That the deficit is rising, 90%. That the majority of Latinos are illegal immigrants, 30%. So these kinds of understandings of the facts shape how people potentially vote. So for people who do support gay marriage, gay rights, misunderstanding that fact would be a detriment to their ability to make judgments. Additionally, we're seeing activists using framing through videos, media that's circulating is a really important and powerful way of shaping public dialogue. So this is an infographic from the DREAM activist movement. We know they were successful in changing legislation. And so it's a powerful tool, but it's one that isn't particularly taught in schools. And there are a lot of sort of possibilities in the digital age, but also a lot of challenges. So you don't have to walk to the library or get the encyclopedia, and if the newspaper doesn't happen to cover what you're interested in, there are other sources that probably do. There's likely a blog out there that will talk about what you're interested in. And so young people have sort of more access to information than ever before, and they also are able to share information publicly. On the other hand, as we covered before, it's really difficult to even develop standards for what credible information looks like if you aren't just relying on the vetted newspaper sources and things like that. And it's just hard to sort through the masses of information. And another sort of troubling piece is there's reduced control over what happens to the information you put out. So if you send a letter to the editor at the newspaper, the responses are vetted by the editor. If you put something on a blog, somebody might repurpose it, recirculate it. So an example that Lissa Soap of Youth Radio has shared, talking about this issue of the digital afterlife, is the young people she was working with created a pretty in-depth exploration of sex work and prostitution in Oakland and the young people that were affected by it. That got one little piece of the story, got excerpted and shared by Gawker, an online blog site. It turned into this sort of funny story that went way beyond the intention of the young people circulating it. So understanding what happens to the information you put online. Some people choose to just avoid putting information online. Others choose to think about how do you think about that narrative. And then in our setting, what we see is information literacy is expected. So 82% of students said they were expected to search for information online, but it's not fully supported. Far fewer get any support, report getting any support for credibility or how to do search terms. So teachers are sort of relying on them to be able to use the internet effectively, but aren't necessarily giving them the supports they need. And we also see, echoing some of the earlier research, that while young people like to see what's online, they're hesitant to put their perspectives out there. So just to give you a little bit of the digital media context in Oakland, this is a teacher survey that the school district supported, and 93% said technology is crucial to education reform, so there's a lot of will there, and that's what we're seeing with the teachers we're working with. 63% had no technology professional development, and so we really saw ourselves as starting to fill in that gap, and we didn't want people to just use technology, but to think about how do you prepare students to use technology well? How do you use it to enhance your classroom? 1 out of 4 students had no access to computers in schools. 37% had challenges finding working computers, and we're also dealing with filters, so blocks to YouTube. One of the critical pieces of this initiative that we've done is we worked very closely with the instructional technologists and the technology team, because they're starting to get resources in because of the testing requirements, and to say, as these netbooks and Chromebooks are coming in, how do we create opportunities for teachers to learn to use them well, so that they're not just like carting them out when testing time comes and putting them away. And that requires some support. It's a shift in classroom practice. So that's also a piece that we thought was critical. Okay, so I want to just share, we're in year 3 of this project, and there are some emerging practices coming out. So one of the things I want to do is share a little bit about what we're seeing in terms of teachers teaching towards civic information literacy. And I'm going to lay out 4 practices. So we've talked a bit about search and access, credibility. We're seeing a lot of shifts in communication and presentation of issues. And then finally, and this really is the small tip of the triangle at this point, is using information for action. And I'd love to have more of a discussion about that at the end. And this is really where we see the meat of the work happening right now. It's not the only work we want to see going on, but this seems to be where most of the work is happening. So I'll share a few examples with you. And I'm going to try and pull, as I mentioned, for us, civic education happens across the curriculum and across the grade levels. So I'll be sharing examples from social studies, but also from English classes. Okay, actually, let me move back a little bit. So the first example, searching and finding information. So as I saw at least one person nod, often what happens, actually, let's do this. Can I see a raising of hands? How many for you do your students typically just pick the first 1 or 2 things they find when searching? Okay, it's not just Oakland. Yeah?
They find the shortest.
They find the shortest. Okay, so the strategies are first one, the shortest one. Some students, it might be the easiest to read, that kind of thing. So I want to share first just a little framing of why I think this is so important, because search is kind of a dry topic often. When I did a version of this presentation a few months ago, I was looking for sort of an inspiring story of an Oakland teen, and I typed in Oakland teen. And the results I got were not good. Oakland teen shot, Oakland teen arrested, Oakland teen in a car accident, that kind of thing. So I went back and typed Oakland youth, and then I got Oakland youth wins award, Oakland youth working towards this. So that one sort of shift in the search term really changed the picture I was getting of young people in Oakland. And so it's that kind of thing that I think illustrates why it's so important for young people to really understand that there are multiple ways of getting at search. And so one of our teachers took this on. She's a 11th grade English teacher in a very highly impacted school. Lot of dropout there, a lot of turnover. They do a junior research project. She partners very closely with the history teacher so that the students are examining social issues and presenting them so that by senior year they can do it more effectively. And so the first year she did a project where they had to put something on a newspaper site and did this very sort of elaborate research project, and what she found was that she was happy with her students' writing, but not with their analysis of the issues. So in the second year, she scaled way back in terms of the scope of the project, but wanted to focus really intensely on search. And so what she did was started this project that she called the Research Accordion. And so monthly, she would have the students sit down and this would fit with whatever lesson she was doing. So in this lesson, they were reading coming-of-age stories like Divergent, which is sort of a popular one. But she would do this monthly with different topics. So the Zoot Suit riots, Vietnam War, things like that. And have the students just go through a process of coming up with a search term, seeing what they got, and then they had to ask another question and revise their search term and do this over and over. And she would have them do it 5 times and then do some kind of product related to it. And what she was finding was that they were coming up with better sources than in the past when she had told them to do research and give them a worksheet of credibility sort of to determine, because they were she was trying to push them into the mindset of asking another question, going down the rabbit hole. So for her, this was her effort to try to get them to really see the power of the internet. And when we interviewed the students after, they were sort of echoing what she said. So I was asking, why do you think she had you do this? And one of the students said to make it more interesting, to get more facts about our topic, to understand things in a different way. And I'd asked, is that how you did it before? And they're like, no, before I would pick the first thing. So we're seeing they really did sort of shift their thinking about the process of search. Another student said, in the past when researching, she would pick the first thing, and if she didn't understand it well, she'd still use it, and now she actually sort of keeps searching and looking for something she understands. So we haven't yet analyzed the survey data from that class to look at. We had them do sort of an information task, and so we'll be looking at whether they're actually employing these strategies. But in terms of the students' internalization of search is something that you can sort of push on and think about in a more nuanced way. We're seeing evidence that that's the case. And we also interviewed them in relation to the research projects they did as part of their history class, and they reported sort of transferring those strategies over to that process. So, okay. So the second area, analysis and credibility, and I would love to get a little audience feedback. So what kind of strategies do your students currently use to determine whether they can use something? Any examples? Or things not to use? Yeah. Okay. Okay, so if they can find it in more than one source. Other, Not to use Wikipedia, we hear that a lot.
Right.
And yeah?
I think 2 things, trying to use, recognize academic databases. And also trying to filter whatever they find through, an understanding of logical reasoning and argumentation.
Okay, so academic databases, the authority, and then logical reasoning, the sort of critical thinking aspect of it.
My students have to check at least 2 sources that are referenced in the article that was said.
Okay, so check at least 2 sources. So you guys are definitely, we'll buzz through this because you're already quite there. What we were seeing in our setting is most students, what they were getting is don't use Wikipedia and use .gov, .org, or .edu sites, which is problematic because there's plenty of .org sites that actually have quite a bit of misinformation. So I'll share a couple of examples of just how the teachers in our project have been attacking this, and one really in relation to political action, which I think is kind of interesting. So the first teacher, a 10th grade teacher, English teacher, but they do a year-long project of what is the civil rights issue of our time. So it's part of an academy, so it has a sort of civic focus. And her goal with doing this was to get her students to think more deeply about the issues that they were getting and do better research. And so the way she started off, and she's an interesting person because she's quite young and quite comfortable with digital media herself, but had not been using it in the classroom at all. And so in this project, one of the things she started to do was shift her focus on trying to get her students to do, instead of giving them the sources, to give them the skills to find their sources themselves. And so the way she approached this, we're in an urban setting, is had the students come up with a question that was really relevant to them as the starting point. So they chose, is Tupac dead or alive? For those of you who don't know, Tupac, very famous rapper, and a lot of sort of myth around whether he's alive or not. And I put this picture up here because that's a hologram of him performing at Coachella, just to sort of give you a flavor of how hard it is to know whether information is correct or not. So if you're like, well, I saw him, you saw a hologram of him at Coachella, so it just adds the internet adds another layer of challenge there. So she started with something they were really comfortable with to get them into the idea of how would we tell? What does this source say? What does this source say? So they started to evaluate different sources that said different things about this question that was highly relevant to them. In the following year, I think she had them come up, they came up with like an urban legend about something found in a Pepsi. So she just starts with things that they're actually really interested in and comfortable with to introduce this idea of comparing and weighing evidence, how do you know, and then starts to move it into the realm of the civil rights issues that they are exploring. And what she found was through this process, and what we're seeing from her students, is they're starting to sort of ask more questions about the information that they're getting, and starting to do things like look for, is there a source that says the opposite thing, and who said the information, the kinds of strategies many of you are talking about. Okay. But I want to share another example that I think is kind of interesting and different. So this is an 11th grade law teacher, not comfortable with digital media at all, has been teaching for quite some time. Very passionate about her students having access to government. So this is a quote she put on her blog at the end of the project. I'm a firm believer in the people. If given the truth, they can be depended upon to meet any national crisis. The great point is bringing them to the real facts. So she's starting from, and this is Abraham Lincoln, so starting from a very sort of traditional framing that this is important to her. What she wanted to do with her students is she had a water rights project that she was doing with her students, where they were analyzing in this time of drought, and we're probably since I'm in Southern California, I'm probably in a land of many different views on how water is moving throughout the state, but she was interested in her students becoming educated about this. This is not a sexy topic for young people, water rights. It's not something that they're all necessarily like sitting around thinking about. But she was very passionate about doing this, and the goal was for them to then meet with Assemblymember Bonta and actually have some dialogue around his policy on this. And so the way she approached it is she wanted them to be informed when they came to talk to him. And so she picked sources and had them collectively analyze those sources using the CRAP test, which is aptly named for, is the information crap or not? I did not name this, so don't hold me accountable. And the idea is the students would collectively analyze the same sources for currency. So is the date relevant to what they're trying to argue about? The relevance, is this actually information that would help us have this conversation? Who said it, the authority, what kind of organization? Accuracy, is the same information someplace else? Are we seeing conflicting evidence? And the purpose. So what is the author trying to convey? And so another interesting take on this project is what she would do is they would sit in the computer lab, put up a Google Doc that had a sort of framework for the CRAP test, and they would raise questions together about the source. And so this helped the students sort of generate questions and ideas in a collective fashion. There were some pitfalls with that. There was some messing with each other on the Google Doc in terms of readjusting somebody's margins or commenting on each other's stuff. So there's a little bit of classroom management stuff that went with it. But the students in the post-interview actually found it really interesting to see what other people thought, and it helped them get a sense of how to engage with the article, not just on their own, but collectively. And the result of this, and I went along and watched the field trip, was it was really fascinating. So, you know, Representative Bonta has people come in all the time. And there was a moment where he's talking about his story, and the students are there, and they're happy to be there, and then they start asking questions about water rights. And there was sort of a moment where he did a double take, and it's like, oh, you did your homework. And so in the post-interviews, the students were saying things like, when we talked to Bonta, we were talking to him about water, he seemed surprised that we knew as much as we knew. So maybe it helped us realize we're learning for a purpose. And they also talked to a consultant for one of the senators, and they were just saying how he had been telling them some things they already knew, so they felt really informed on the issue. And it also helped them see that people in the government are actually working on the things that they're talking about in school. So this process of going through and really educating themselves and thinking about the information that they're getting and bringing it to an elected official sort of shifted their relationship to this government authority. Another area where we're seeing, and this is actually seeing quite a bit of shift, is in how teachers are thinking about communication and presentation. So we've seen a lot of teachers move from doing a classic research paper to having the products of students' research be all over the map in terms of products. One example is a teacher who works with what she calls out-of-the-box thinkers. She's in a day class, and one of the things she was interested in was how can she use infographics to help her students engage in content. So many of them had trouble with focusing on reading and things like that. And it wasn't instead of, but more an opportunity for them to have an entry point into writing. And so she would bring in infographics on things like food justice, education, global inequality, have the students try to understand the messages of these infographics and then write towards those topics with the idea that they too will also create their infographics. This is interesting for a couple of reasons. One, we know that information is being circulated that way quite a bit these days because it can be shared easily on social media. And a study that Ben Bowyer, Joe Kahn, and I are doing also show that people misunderstand the messages of these things quite a bit. So being able to critically assess infographics is a helpful tool. This one is the rant video. So an economics teacher who was teaching about income inequality was interested in having the students as part of a classroom discussion, understand different ways of rhetoric and discussing these issues. And so he had the students watch some what he calls rant videos. So think Bill O'Reilly, Keith Olbermann, just to go from both sides of the equation here. And they would watch those and analyze them and then create their own rant video. And I'm going to play one for you. I want to say before I play it, the idea was not for this to be the end product of what they were doing, but a way of understanding, bringing some of the facts they're learning to an engaging format and understanding the genre. But it was part of a much bigger project where they were learning to do evidence-based class discussion. So this isn't my idea of the thing that should come out of any.
Hi, my name is Nat. Today I want to talk about how the government won't raise the minimum wage for workers in Oakland and other places. This issue makes me really angry because you simply can't live off $8 an hour, and I believe the people that are to blame for this is Obama and the people of the government. I really hate how they talk about wanting to help the people, but they aren't doing anything. They have all this money to build nice buildings and to wage stupid wars against other countries, yet they don't have the decency to raise the minimum wage up a few dollars. I want to start off by saying how corporations like McDonald's, Wendy's, Jack in the Box, and Taco Bell, how they make millions of dollars each year, but they only pay the workers about $8 an hour, and that's not fair. So I did the calculations, and an average person that works 5 days a week for any of these fast food restaurants makes about $1,280 per month. And after paying rent, utility bills, and whatnot, they end up with about $130 left, and that's not a lot. So some might say, how come these minimum wage workers, why don't they go back to school or find a better job? But they're wrong because most jobs that pay more than minimum wage requires a level of education or a specific degree, and school is not cheap. It costs a lot of money. The solution to this problem is to go on a walkout strike. This will cause big businesses lose lots of money, and maybe they'll think twice about not raising the minimum wage. So therefore, we should raise the minimum wage up to about $12 to $15 to give those that get paid $8 an hour an opportunity at a better life. Thank you.
So as I was saying, this was not the end product, but more along the way, one of the things he was interested in is having students really learn to analyze sort of emotionally laden videos, because that is what's coming through a lot of the media, create their own, and then throughout the course of the semester, start to push them towards argument, evidence-based argument. And so this was sort of part of an overall process of following this one person. And again, in our national surveys, we've exposed people, we shared user-generated political videos with our participants and asked them what the message of the video was. And we found in a pretty straightforward, funny one, about 30% misunderstood the message of the video. And in the satirical ones, the number's more like 67%. So as there's a lot more sort of people are getting their information through participatory media. A lot of it looks like infographics, user-generated videos, but do they understand the genre? And then the last example of this is a world history teacher who had his students do a research project on the health of nations. So they had to take up a nation and explore its political, social, economic health, and they created their own sort of wiki site on this. One, giving them a sense of how the Wikipedia articles are created, where the links are, that kind of thing, so producing it themselves, putting it into a format that is much like the kinds of formats you see on digital media. And this was a protected one. They didn't actually put it on Wikipedia. It would have been interesting to see what happens with that. So, okay, and then, oh good, we will have time for questions. So, and then the last, I'll share a couple the other ways in which people are having their students share information are TED Talks. So we have a teacher who had some students do TED Talks for the end of their senior research projects, and I just don't have the video on those yet. I wish I did, because there are a couple of like fantastic examples, really impressive. And Ignite presentations, which are short presentations that force you to sort of make a new point every 15 to 20 seconds. And what we're seeing from that is that those formats are sort of forcing the students into a narrative that is helping with their ability to talk about political issues. Okay, and then the last part, because this is in our framework, it's issue analysis, discussion, action. And so one of the things we're looking for is how are people integrating civic action into the curriculum? And we are seeing more examples of that. In year one, I think it was really tough. Year two, we're starting to see teachers do more of trying to get students to reach out to the community. So rather than thinking of civic action as one big civic action project, how do you integrate more community contact? So having students interview experts, having students do educational things, raise awareness. Most of what we're seeing around this is not online, interestingly. There's one teacher who did gave her students the option of doing a social media campaign, and a couple students took it up, and those tended to be the higher income students. So one of our challenges this year is how do you think about doing action with digital media in the classroom? So often I think people think, well, for it to be meaningful action, it needs to be face-to-face, it needs to be in person, that's where the real power is. And so it's a real question mark of if students are doing a petition or doing a charity drive on Facebook, does that have the same power? There is one way in which I think we're seeing people using digital media now, and I just want to share sort of the students' feelings about it because I find it very interesting. So a number of our teachers are partnering with an academic social network site called Youth Voices that was created by National Writing Project teachers, and having their students post their research projects on there, or different thoughts on, they did letters to the superintendent based on a book they had read, different things. And another area is we have teachers participating with KQED, which is the public radio station where we are, and they have a program called Do Now, and so the students come in we have a Do Now, which I think a lot of you probably know about, but they have a few themes where you can actually tweet your Do Nows and be part of a larger conversation, so around civic issues or science things. It's not clear to me if we have things that are moving students towards thinking about making actual change, so they're expressing their perspectives, they're putting their voices out there, they're starting to shape issues, but in terms of projects that affect change, we're seeing more things like face-to-face voter registration drives, bake sales, things like that. So one of the challenges and interesting things is just how do we think about using digital tools more effectively towards this end. And I just wanted to close with a couple of student perspectives on this, because I think frequently we have teachers who say, well, I want them to really get out into the community, or I don't want them to get away from their computers and that kind of thing, so it'll be more meaningful. And when we talked to students who had been on this Youth Voices site, it's sort of interesting how digital media is helping them discover their community. So an 11th grade student was talking about putting her research project on obesity and animal cruelty on the site, and she was saying how great it was to get comments. It was her first time feeling like an author, and feels like you're somebody because somebody's reading it. So for her, comments from students in New York or Utah or that kind of thing were actually making her feel like her voice mattered. And then interestingly, one of the students was talking about they were also required to comment on each other in class, and we've seen this echoed in a few different places where the students are actually learning something else about each other through this process. So this student is talking about a student who in class is sort of a cut-up and acts like he doesn't care about anything and that kind of thing, and then when he saw him writing about and having to comment on him writing about his issues, his feelings about issues of racism, was like, oh, you actually do care about these kinds of things. And I had interviewed the student he's talking about, and it was interesting because watching him in class, I thought he would be not interested in the interview, but often when you get students one-on-one, you get sort of, they let down their guard, and so it was echoing sort of what I had seen in the interview. And we've also seen students who sort of discovered through commenting on each other's blogs that somebody was going through something, and so it's just an interesting way of mediating students sort of discovering each other's points of view, which they might actually not feel comfortable doing when they're hanging out face to face. So, in conclusion, we've got about 15 minutes for discussion, but what I would really love from you as an audience is we've learned some of what you're doing in your classroom currently, and I'm happy to just answer questions, but I'd also love to hear from folks whether there are things that you're working on now in your own classroom practice related to this, or whether you've seen examples of these sort of civic action projects that really integrate digital media that you'd like to share. Questions? Uh-huh. It's secondary only right now. We've started partnering with the middle school coordinator to sort of work our way down to middle school. And on Youth Voices, the site I was talking about, they do have elementary schools in that network. So I had one student talk about how mind-blowing it was to see an elementary school commenting on serious issues. Uh-huh.
And one thing I'd like to share with the group here is when I'm a computer applications teacher, and one of the things when I discuss the internet and what have you, I ask the students to keep in mind Marshall McLuhan's quote, which is, first we shape our tools, then our tools shape us. And also David Suskine in the meaning of the message. Now I'm kind of a throwback to a mass communication major, but the idea there is if I get them at the start of this, get them to thinking, okay, how you feel the media is shaping your thoughts. Mm-hmm. Okay, and are you aware of it? Because most of the time, a lot of students, they're in their own little world, they're constantly thinking. The thing I'm trying to do is get them to go ahead and when they come to the classroom door, they start to see, flip the switch on. Well, and Take a look at yourself in the mirror. What went right today? What went wrong today? How can you improve for tomorrow? And that's really this ties right into that.
Questions or comments?
I'll come up.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I was supposed to tell you to come up to the mic. Sorry.
So I wonder if in any of this work you've experienced students that don't want to share their social media with a school. They don't want their academic life intruding on their social life.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we've been looking into that in a few different ways. We have some colleagues at Harvard who are part of the research network that the national survey was part of, who have done a nice paper on, they've interviewed students who are politically active and about that sort of idea of segmenting off or blending your different identities. And it's a really interesting finding because students vary in that. And we are seeing in so the reason teachers have sort of chosen Youth Voices as a network rather than Facebook is for the reason of thinking about how are you like the teachers are pretty explicit about trying to communicate, there are different ways to present yourself online. Right now, the only way you're presenting yourself online is socially. Are there other ways to sort of present yourself online? And so using that site as a way for them to explore sort of professional online norms or academic online presence has been an explicit part of the conversation. And there are definitely some students who, were not comfortable tweeting necessarily. There are a few reluctant, but for the most part, the goal hasn't been to sort of move into their social spaces as much as it is to get them to sort of explore the more academic and professional uses. And then there was some other point I wanted to make on this that I'm now losing. Shoot, I'm sure it'll come back to me. Oh, that was it. One of the more interesting things we've seen actually is for some of the more academically motivated students, some of this has been a little tricky in terms of thinking, wait, there's not a right answer. And so I'm just thinking in terms of pushback, there were some students who felt like they weren't really writing because they were typing on the computer, and that's not what they had done before. They had not used computers for academic purposes before. And there were some students who, in the search project, felt very threatened by the idea of just sort of exploring and going where they're interested because they wanted to perform. And so I think it's, whereas overall, we're seeing in the survey data and in the observation data higher levels of student engagement when these activities come in, so they're more likely to say school is meaningful and relevant when they have more of these opportunities. There are some shifts for some students. Yeah. Oh yeah, thanks.
I was just going to say that one of the necessities that I found in using digital media in the classroom, and this is not something that I necessarily created, but something I gathered from a seminar put on at Columbia University through the through NEH, National Endowment for the Humanities. It was a digital history seminar, and one of the powerful things that I learned is not so much the application, the software, that's something that's free and accessible, but one of the fundamental shifts that I think kids need to see is that it takes tenacity to truly create something with technology, that it's not enough to just throw a laptop at a kid and say, go at it, because what's going to happen is, like you said, they're going to just poke around. But they have to learn to apply tenacity and grit to really exploring and solving problems, because a lot of times when they're creating something like a student documentary, that was our big project at the end of the year. An actual documentary is not just a collection of pictures in a slideshow.
Right.
It's resolving a real essential question, like good documentarians do, using good media and good materials and good pictures and good stories that are real world and based on reality. So I think that's part of the key using also social media and technology, is getting kids to really learn to stick to a topic and consistently maintaining that line of thinking to resolve and problem solve.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think one of the things we were seeing across classrooms when we would talk to teachers at the end and ask what would you do differently is I would do more of this throughout the year, because it takes so much practice and iteration for students to really get it. So looking for opportunities to have them post online or get feedback, and to really, I mean, one of the nice things is it can push them into a sort of iteration mindset. If they're so a teacher who had them post each phase of their research project online and get comments, they were getting comments from other students, which was pushing them to think about how do you change their topic. And she had been really struggling with how to get them to revise and think differently. And so she found having other students doing the commenting was actually pushing them in that direction. But yeah, practice, practice, practice is what I kept hearing from Futures at the end. Yeah.
I'm just going to say that microphone's very far. I also have students it's called sweetsearch.com. And it only uses like accredited websites actually.
Sweetsearch.com.
Yeah, like Infotopia.
Okay.
I just say there's some search engines that are less used that really help out a lot. No,
Right. Infotopia. Yeah, and I would say there's sort of two approaches to that. So some of the teachers are, more on the how do you actually sort through more generally, and then how do you learn about authoritative databases, and they both have sort of different benefits. Yeah.
I was just looking at SweetSearch, and it says evaluated by our research experts. Well, we don't know who the research experts are.
Yep. So,
It's interesting, though. I'm going to have to try it.
yeah. And one of that just prompted for me something else, which was some of the students I was talking to who weren't in the credibility classrooms talked about how something was trustworthy because it came from the newspaper. And so what was interesting is they were all saying Wikipedia is not trustworthy, but they weren't necessarily applying the same critical lens to vetted resources, which can also have bias and have points of view and that kind of thing, even though there are professional standards. I think learning to sort of question the authorities that put out information is part of the education of critical thinking. Any other comments or questions? Wrap up a few minutes early. Okay, thank you all. Appreciate you coming out.